Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Pakistan, the military spokesperson Major General Babar Iftikhar says the army is helping the civil administration deal with the coronavirus epidemic. Addressing a joint civil-military press conference in Islamabad, he said that timely and accurate flow of information is needed to avoid the panic. General Babar said National Security Committee has devised a plan to fight against COVID-19. Earlier, Special Assistant to Prime Minister Zafar Mirza said people must observe social distancing to curb the outbreak. He said people should avoid unnecessarily visiting hospitals. Mirza said there are 326 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Pakistan with 2 deaths. Government spokesperson Dr. Firdaus Ashik Awan said the Economic Committee is reviewing the economic fallout of the outbreak. She said there is no shortage of food or items of essential use in Pakistan. Pakistan has expressed concern over the grim human rights situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir, which has been under curfew for the last 228 days. In a media briefing, Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Faruqi said Islamabad will continue condemning occupation forces' barbarism in the valley. She said calling Kashmir an integral part of India is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Faruqi said Kashmiris continue to be deprived of their fundamental freedoms, a right to liberty, health, education and food. The spokesperson said Islamabad calls on the Indian government to lift its communication blackout. Discussing the coronavirus, she said Pakistan is taking effective steps to curb the spread of the deadly pandemic. She said Pakistanis both in the country and abroad are advised to avoid all the non-essential travel. The International Press Institute says media freedom in occupied Kashmir is under a serious threat from Indian forces. In a report, the body said state surveillance and pressure on journalists in the valley has increased since August. The report said journalists have been stopped from going to the occupied valley to report on current developments. It said Indian authorities have evicted journalists from residences provided by the government. Quoting Kashmiri journalists, the report said occupation forces are stopping media coverage on human rights abuses in the valley. The report said August blackout was the 55th internet blockade recorded in the valley last year. Over 400 village councils in 15 districts of India's eastern Odisha have passed a resolution against the Citizenship Amendment Act. 11 state governments, including Kerala, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh and Rajasthan, have passed such resolutions. After passing motions, a memorandum was sent to Odisha Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik and collectors of 15 districts. Civil rights activists and organizations have been canvassing in these villages against the controversial law. Meanwhile, over 5,000 people took to the streets in Chennai to protest against the Citizenship Act. The protest near Marina Beach demanded its withdrawal and a resolution in the Tamil Nadu Assembly against the act. The Indian government is facing countrywide unrest against the act, in which 83 people have been killed since December. NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg calls on Afghan leaders to resolve their differences and work for peace in the country. He was referring to the political impasse created after Abdullah refused to accept Ashraf Ghani as the country's president. In a press conference, Stoltenberg said NATO will reduce its presence in the country in line with the US. He said the bloc's train and advice mission will draw down to around 12,000 personnel from 16,000 over the next 135 days, but he said this will depend on the Taliban continuing to reduce violence. Afghanistan's National Security Council says Kabul's position on the release of prisoners is unchanged. NSC spokesperson Javed Faisal says the prisoners will only be released after intra-Afghan talks start and the Taliban guarantee a reduction in violence. The council statement came after US envoy Zalmay Khalilzad called for the immediate release of the prisoners as per the Doha peace deal. In a tweet, NSC spokesperson Javed Faisal said the Taliban have to guarantee they will reduce violence for the prisoners' release. Faisal said the group also has to assure Kabul those getting released won't be returning to war. Earlier, Khalilzad said all the sides should resolve the political crisis resulting from elections and dual inaugurations. Khalilzad also met self-proclaimed Afghan President Abdullah to discuss a way out of the political crisis in the country. Abdullah's office says the meeting could not find a solution to ease tensions with President Ashraf Ghani. Turkey confirms one more of its soldiers has been killed in Syria's northwestern Idlib province. Meanwhile, NATO says the bloc is mulling over its options to assist Ankara's efforts in the war-torn country. Speaking during a virtual conference, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said no other member of the bloc has been affected by the Syrian conflict as much as Turkey. He said NATO has already increased its naval presence in the region. Stoltenberg condemned the Syrian regime's indiscriminate attacks in Syria and called on Damascus to seek a political solution to the conflict. He said Spain is delivering capabilities meant to augment the Turkish air defense system. Last month, an airstrike that Ankara said was carried out by the Syrian government forces killed at least 34 Turkish soldiers. In Libya, 4 people are killed in a fresh wave of attacks by Khalifa Haftar's LNA forces in Tripoli. Haftar's forces launched 2 separate attacks on the capitals Zara and Bab bin Ghashir areas. Health officials say 2 others were wounded in the raids. They said the attack on Zara suburb killed 3 children from the same family, while a woman was killed in Bab bin Ghashir area. Heavy fighting between the government of the National Accord forces and the Haftar militia has resumed since yesterday. Earlier, the UN, along with 9 countries, called on Libya's warring parties for a humanitarian truce to cease hostilities amid the COVID-19 pandemic. In Yemen, a court inside Houthi-controlled Sana'a has sentenced 19 army officers loyal to the government to death. The ruling is the latest in a series of death penalties by the Houthi rebels against their political and military opponents. Lawyers in Sana'a said the specialized criminal court accused the generals of working in collusion with Saudi-led coalition. Vice President Ali Mohsen Al-Ahmar and Defense Minister Mohammad Ali Al-Magdashi were also sentenced in absentia. Earlier, the rebel-controlled court sentenced 35 lawmakers to death for switching sides. On 6th of March, the UN Human Rights Office called on the Houthis to scrap death penalties and house raids. Israel has increased its activity to build settlements in the occupied Palestinian land in the West Bank area. According to an annual report on settlement activity, Donald Trump era yearly construction average is 25% higher than in Obama era. Peace Now, an Israeli activist group, says during President Trump's tenure over the past 3 years, 6,800 new units have been constructed. During his predecessor Barack Obama's tenure, on average 1,805 such units came up in occupied lands. The report said the Israeli government started construction of 1,917 new housing units since 2019 across occupied West Bank. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Prisoners Society said that 4 Palestinian inmates contracted the new coronavirus in an Israeli prison. Israel's President Reuven Rivlin has called his Palestinian counterpart Mahmoud Abbas and sought coordination to counter the coronavirus pandemic. Palestinian state media said President Abbas welcomed the initiative to contain the spread of the virus. This is the first call between the 2 leaders since US President Donald Trump revealed his Middle East peace plan in late January. The plan recognized Jerusalem as Israel's undivided capital. Britain is withdrawing some of its troops from a global training mission in Iraq because of the coronavirus outbreak. Defense Minister Ben Wallace said troops were being brought back because of a decline in the tempo of training in recent months. Details in this report.
He said that the coalition program has been paused for 60 days as a precaution because of the outbreak. Earlier, the US also said that its army is pulling out of Al-Qaim and 2 other key military bases in Iraq in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, NATO says it is scaling down military exercises in Europe to curb the spread of the virus. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told a video news conference some of the exercises have been modified or cancelled, but the bloc's forces remain ready. He said there have been no reports of infections of the disease among members of NATO's military mission in Afghanistan. NATO officials say they are taking preventative measures across all their operations, including regularly taking the temperatures of personnel.
The US says it will retaliate to attacks on American forces anywhere in the world. The Pentagon statement followed the recent attacks on US troops and coalition forces in Iraq. In a briefing in Washington, Pentagon spokesperson Jonathan Hoffman says the US retains the right to defend its forces. Hoffman said the US is exploring possibility on how to retaliate. In Iraq, at least 2 Americans and a British soldier were killed in an attack last week. 3 American troops and several Iraqi forces were wounded on Saturday in another rocket attack near Baghdad. No group has yet claimed the responsibility for the attacks. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Over 15,000 new cases have been reported across the world as the global coronavirus death toll rises to nearly 9,000. But there is good news coming from China, where the outbreak began. This report has the details.
As the world grapples with the severity of the new coronavirus pandemic, China, the place of origin of the fatal disease, has for the first time reported no new local cases over the past 24 hours. Beijing is now sending its medical teams to other countries struggling to contain the outbreak. The second team of Chinese medical experts arrived in Italy, where the virus has wreaked havoc.
The main difficulty we have now is the shortage of medical staff. Now, all doctors and nurses in Lombardy are involved in the fight against epidemic. We need medical workers because the peak number of confirmed coronavirus cases may come in a few days. So China's help to us is very important. The donations from China are what we urgently need, which can save many lives. I thank the Chinese people. Thank you.
Sub-Saharan Africa reported its first COVID-19 death, a high-ranking politician in Burkina Faso, as the World Health Organization urges the continent to prepare for the worst. New Zealand and Australia are the latest to shut borders to all foreigners as the hysteria of transborder coronavirus infections mounts. Spain, among the worst hit in Europe, is struggling to contain the virus at a time when the country is facing divisions over secession movements.
We must now put aside our differences. We must unite around the same objective to overcome this serious situation. And we must do so together among all of us with serenity, with confidence, but also with determination and energy. Now we have to resist, to endure, and we have to adapt our ways of life and our behavior to the advice of our authorities and the recommendations of our experts in order to beat the virus.
Beijing and Hong Kong are toughening up their 14-day quarantine restrictions as a second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic returns with homecoming citizens. US President Donald Trump will invoke emergency powers, but California Governor Gavin Newsom says 60,000 homeless in the state could get coronavirus in the next 8 weeks.
Spain has announced 211 more deaths from the new coronavirus, pushing the overall total to 767. The number of infected patients in the country has jumped to over 17,000 despite a partial lockdown on 47 million people. Iran's death toll from the coronavirus increased to 1,284, with 149 more deaths in the past 24 hours. Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte says country will remain under lockdown beyond previous deadlines. Italy is the hardest hit country in Europe with nearly 3,000 deaths. France's Interior Minister said the 15-day lockdown could be extended if necessary. The country reported 89 new deaths on Wednesday, taking the total to 264. In the UK, coronavirus fatalities hit 105 as Northern Ireland recorded its first death. Schools across the UK will be shut down by the end of the week as part of the response to the deadly bug. In the Netherlands, so far there have been 2,051 cases and 58 deaths. The number of cases in Germany climbed roughly a third in a single day as the total tally increased to 10,999 cases, while 20 patients died. Meanwhile, EU's Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier announced that he tested positive for the disease. The new coronavirus pandemic has changed the way people interact and live, with lockdowns and social restrictions across the world. From empty streets in Paris to cleaner canals in Venice, all spheres of human social life bear an impact. More in this report.
The French government has put up its 67 million people under lockdown in an unprecedented act during peacetime to stem the spread of coronavirus. The streets surrounding Paris' famous landmarks remain empty, with just a few cars seen on the roads. The normally bustling central plaza of Paris's main business district is also deserted at lunchtime.
It's been okay till now. It's more about having to stay inside, which is a bit stressful, but I'm lucky enough to have a dog, which makes getting around easier. For the moment, it is okay.
Usually business streets in the Athens are empty after Greece shut down all retail stores. In Belgium, Brussels streets and squares looked deserted after the country went into a total lockdown. The US tourist hotspots of Miami's fabled Ocean Drive is nearly empty, and restaurants and cafes remain closed.
Well, for locals this is a big relief because spring break was really wild here, but just the reason because all this happening, when you know what's the thing, then it's really sad, especially because they closed the beach from 5th to 15th Street.
While in the UK the impact of the pandemic on local businesses is huge following the government advice to cut down social contact. But all is not bad. Venice canals, usually bogged down with tourists in gondolas and motorboats, are now crystal clear for the first time in years. Italian government has closed the country for foreign tourists and told Italians to stay home.
U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has called on President Donald Trump to speed up mass production of medical and protective equipment. Pelosi urged Trump to use the Defense Production Act, citing shortages in the country. She said the shortage of critical medical equipment is harming the country's ability to fight the coronavirus. The House Speaker told President Trump in a letter that lawmakers know the demand of this time and must act now to meet them. On Wednesday, Trump signed into law a coronavirus relief package that includes provisions for free testing for COVID-19. But Pelosi said the president has not yet invoked the powers needed to accelerate the production of medical equipment. The World Health Organization says Africa must wake up to the coronavirus threat and prepare for the worst. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the continent should learn from how the spread of the virus has sped up elsewhere. He warned that while Africa's confirmed cases were currently low, around 640, there was no reason for complacency. Health experts warned that strained public health systems in Africa could become quickly overwhelmed if the virus takes hold, especially in overcrowded urban areas. In Africa, 16 people had died from the virus, 6 in Egypt and Algeria, 2 in Morocco, and 1 each in Sudan and Burkina Faso. In South Africa, which has 116 cases, President Cyril Ramaphosa has declared a state of emergency. In France, Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire has accused Amazon of exerting unacceptable pressure on employees. His remarks came after staff complained they will face non-payment if they stopped showing up due to the coronavirus contamination. Several hundred Amazon workers have protested in the northern southern district, calling on the online retailer to cease operations. They also demanded their work to be made easier for them as COVID-19 fears surge. Hundreds of Amazon employees have now sought to exercise a French right to stop work while still receiving full pay. Earlier, nearly 300 of 1,700 employees at Amazon's center in northern France refused to work over health risks. In India, 4 convicts of the 2012 gang rape and murder of a New Delhi student will be hanged tomorrow. The court has already dismissed their last-minute petition of delaying the execution. The brutal murder of Jyoti Singh aboard the bus sparked nationwide demonstrations in India. The incident brought the high rates of violence against women in the country into the limelight once again. Speaking in New Delhi, the victim's lawyer said the convicts had exhausted all their legal rights. Welcoming the decision, Singh's mother said her daughter's soul will finally rest in peace. Almost 400 people are on a death row in India, but no one has been executed since 2015. Japan's iconic cherry blossom season has just begun in Tokyo, but this year streets and parks are empty, with people avoiding viewing parties and danger from the coronavirus. People have had to find another way to enjoy the cherry blossom this year, as we see in this report.
This year, summer has come early to Japan. The meteorological agency marked the beginnings of Tokyo's cherry blossom season 12 days earlier than average because of rising temperatures. Every year, viewing parties called hanami, where people gather for a picnic beneath the blossoms, attract millions of visitors. With coronavirus transmission still a legitimate health concern, health officials have discouraged public gatherings. It means cherry blossom parties in parks are going to be much smaller, or perhaps even non-existent.
There's nothing we can do. I think people are worried. It's unfortunate.
The country's traditional cherry blossom festivals have been cancelled, and ropes set up beneath the trees to cordon them off. But parks remain open for people taking walks. And a Japanese website has posted more than 50 videos showing 360-degree views of cherry blossoms in full bloom at Japan's most popular sakura spots.
It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. The International Air Transport Association says up to $200 billion are needed to rescue the world's airlines during the coronavirus crisis. In particular, the association called for emergency assistance to airlines in African and the Middle Eastern countries. Airlines worldwide face an existential threat as the COVID-19 pandemic shuts down global travel. IATA Chief Alexander D. Juniak said that stopping the spread of COVID-19 is the top priority of the governments, but he said they must be aware that the public health emergency has now become a catastrophe for economies and for aviation. D. Juniak said airlines are fighting for survival and warned that millions of jobs are at stake. Meanwhile, Australia's national carrier Qantas has halted all the international flights from late March until at least the end of May. The UN says over 24 million people could become unemployed owing to the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. A report by the UN's International Labour Organization says at least 5 million people will lose their jobs because of the crisis. ILO said coordinated policy response similar to the measures taken in 2008 global financial crisis can significantly lower the impact on global unemployment. The report said in an extreme case, the pandemic can push up to 35 million people in working poverty by the end of 2020. Report notes a surge in unemployment will result in income loss of up to $3.5 trillion by the end of this year. The UK's pound has fallen to its lowest level against the dollar since 1985 as the spread of the coronavirus pandemic spooks investors. The pound is currently trading at $1.15, a fall of almost 5% in 24 hours past the level hit during the October 2016 flash crash. Sterling has come under fierce selling pressure since hitting a 2-month high above $1.31 last week. The sell-off accelerated as traders dumped positions across the board in a mad scramble to get their hands on dollars. Against the euro, the pound fell about 3.5% to just over 94 pence per euro, its lowest level since March 2009. The dollar index advanced to 100, its highest level since April 2017. The European Central Bank has announced an emergency financing package worth $820 billion in a bid to stop a pandemic-induced financial rout. The ECB's new bond purchase scheme shores up its planned purchases for this year to over $1 trillion.
ECB President Christine Lagarde said bond purchases will continue until the pandemic's crisis phase is over, while US President Donald Trump has also signed a sweeping multi-billion-dollar emergency aid package into law to combat the spread of the novel coronavirus. The Joint Committee on Taxation pegged the estimated cost of the package at $105 billion. In a similar trend, South Korea's President Moon Jae-in pledged $39 billion in emergency financing for small businesses along with other stimulus measures.
It is a special emergency financial measure with a scale of 39 billion US dollars. As a public welfare and finance stability package program, this is an unprecedented comprehensive measure in both scale and subject matter.
Turkey has also unveiled a relief package of about $15.5 billion to limit the economic fallout from the coronavirus. Ankara also doubled its credit guarantee funds limit to over $7.5 billion.
Wall Street stocks have risen over actions by central banks to unveil massive new stimulus measures. The Nasdaq Composite jumped, erasing earlier steep losses as high gains in big tech shares led to a sharp turnaround. Shares of Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, and Apple landed in positive territories. The S&P 500 index also traded fractionally higher. The stocks of Dow Jones Industrial Average traded nearly 1% lower. Meanwhile, oil prices rose over 10% after the three-day sell-off drove them to their lowest levels in 2 decades. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.